The air in the gymnasium was thick with nostalgia and the scent of cheap punch, but for me, it smelled like impending doom. I scanned the room, desperate to avoid them, but then I saw her, Bethany. Her smile a shark's grin, already looking my way, my heart hammered against my ribs. This was it, the moment I dreaded for 10 years. If you've ever felt trapped by your past, like you can't escape old labels, subscribe and stay with me. This story might resonate deeper than you think, because some scars never truly fade until you rip them off yourself. I should have known better than to come. My finger had hovered over the RSVP no button for weeks. The invitation, embossed with our high school crest, had felt like a summons, not an invitation. 10 years. A decade since I'd last walked these halls, last felt the suffocating weight of being Elara Vance, the quiet girl, the invisible one, the librarian-to-be who preferred books to people. I'd told myself it was time to face my demons, to prove I'd moved on. A small-town librarian, yes, but a content one. My days were filled with the quiet rustle of turning pages, the soft murmur of children's story time, the satisfying thud of a returned book. My apartment above the Main Street bakery was cozy, filled with plants and the scent of yeast. I had peace, I had purpose. But the moment I stepped into this brightly lit echo chamber of my past, all that peace evaporated. The chatter, the too loud music, the forced laughter, it was a cacophony designed to remind me of every social misstep, every awkward silence, every time I'd felt like an alien observing humanity. I clutched my sparkling cider, the condensation cold against my palm. My gaze darted around, searching for a friendly face, someone who remembered me as more than a shadow. There were a few, scattered like lonely stars, but they were quickly swallowed by the constellations of cliques that had reformed with terrifying ease. Bethany and Chloe were the brightest of those stars. They were magnets, drawing a crowd, their laughter ringing out, louder and more confident than anyone else's. Bethany, still with that perfect blonde bob, and a laugh that sounded like crystal shattering. Chloe, her dark hair sleek, eyes sharp, always the strategist. They were the architects of my high school misery, the queens of the cafeteria, the cheerleaders who'd perfected the art of the polite sneer. I watched them from across the room, feeling the old, familiar knot tighten in my stomach. The humiliation of a decade ago felt as fresh as yesterday. The whispered jokes behind my back, the deliberate exclusion, the way they'd sometimes accidentally bump into me in the hall, sending my books scattering. Small things, perhaps, but they had carved deep grooves in my adolescent soul. I told myself I was stronger now, wiser, that their opinions no longer mattered. But my trembling hand, the way my heart threatened to escape my chest, betrayed the lie. I tried to merge with the wall, to become part of the faded mural of the school mascot. Maybe, if I just blended in, they wouldn't notice me. Maybe I could make it through the night, offer a polite nod, and then disappear back into my quiet life, where the biggest drama was an overdue book. But they noticed. Oh, they always noticed. Their eyes, like heat-seeking missiles, zeroed in on me. Bethany's perfect smile widened, a slow, predatory stretch. She nudged Chloe, whispering something, and Chloe's sharp gaze snapped to me, a glint of recognition, then amusement. They started moving. Slowly, deliberately, they began their approach. Not directly, but circling, like sharks closing in. Their entourage, a group of equally well-preserved, former popular kids, followed in their wake, a wave of polished smiles and expensive perfumes. I felt a cold dread creep up my spine. This wasn't just a casual encounter, this was an orchestrated move. I knew their game. They'd isolate me, make me feel small, and then dissect my life for public entertainment. My breath hitched. I considered making a break for the exit, feigning a sudden illness, anything to escape, but my feet felt rooted to the spot, paralyzed by the sheer inevitability of it all. They reached the refreshments table, pretending to browse the lukewarm punch, but their eyes were on me, calculating. Bethany picked up a plastic cup, turning it slowly in her manicured hand. Chloe adjusted her designer scarf, her lips curved in a subtle, knowing smirk. Well, well, well. Bethany's voice, perfectly modulated, floated across the few feet separating us. It wasn't loud, but it cut through the din of the room, drawing attention. If it isn't Elara Vance, fancy seeing you here." Her eyes swept over my simple dress, my sensible shoes, a clear appraisal of my lack of effort. Chloe chuckled, a low, throaty sound that grated on my nerves. "Still haunting the library, Elara?" she asked, her tone dripping with mock concern. "I mean, it's good someone still reads actual books, I guess." They had me, trapped between the table and a potted palm, with no escape route. The familiar heat of shame began to creep up my neck. I forced a weak smile. "Hello, Bethany, Chloe." My voice sounded thin, reedy, utterly unlike the confident tone I used when recommending a new author to a patron. "It's good to see you both." A lie. A pathetic, transparent lie. Bethany took a sip of her punch, her gaze unwavering. "So, Elara," she began, her voice suddenly saccharine, "tell us, what exciting adventures has life brought you since graduation? Are you still in town? Are you still single?" The questions were delivered with surgical precision, each one a tiny blade. I felt the color drain from my face. My small-town life, which I cherished, suddenly felt like a prison. My single status, which I had made peace with, now felt like a glaring deficiency. I opened my mouth, searching for a witty retort, a confident declaration of my fulfilling existence, but nothing came out. My mind raced, searching for any detail that would impress them, but my life, by their standards, was devoid of flashy careers, exotic travel, or impressive partners. I'm still a librarian," I managed, the words sounding hollow even to my own ears, "here in town, and yes, I'm still single." The admission felt like a confession of failure. Chloe leaned closer, her eyes glittering with malicious satisfaction. "Oh, Elara," she purred, "you poor thing. 10 years and nothing's changed, has it? Still playing with dusty books, still stuck in this little town, still alone." Bethany nodded, a cruel, sympathetic smile on her face. "Some things never change, Elara. You really haven't moved on at all, have you?" The question hung in the air, a final, suffocating blanket, trapping me in my past, my throat closing around the retort I couldn't utter. "Still playing with dusty books, Elara? Some things never change. You really haven't moved on at all, have you?" Bethany's voice, though low, carried a sharp edge that cut through the reunion's background hum. Chloe chuckled beside her, a brittle sound that felt like sandpaper on my skin. My hands, which had been loosely clasped in front of me, tightened into fists, my nails digging into my palms. I could feel the familiar flush creeping up my neck, a telltale sign of the shame I'd carried since adolescence. "It's not just dusty books, Bethany," Chloe added, stepping closer. "Remember that old library club? She used to spend all her lunch breaks there, hiding from everyone. Some things really don't change, do they, Elara? Still hiding." Her words weren't just a jab, they were a surgical strike, aimed directly at the raw nerves of my past. They knew I'd never fit in, never sought the spotlight, and they weaponized that quiet nature against me. The small circle around us seemed to shrink, the air growing thick with their judgment. My gaze darted around, searching for an escape, a friendly face, anyone. But the faces I met were either curious, pitying, or quickly looking away. No one was coming to my rescue. "And she used to write those terrible poems," Bethany reminisced, a fake, wistful look on her face, always about some tragic hero or longing for a grand adventure. "Guess the grand adventure ended up being the local public library, huh?" She nudged Chloe, and they both let out a small, shared laugh. It wasn't loud, but it resonated with the echo of 1,000 high school hallways where their whispers had always been my torment. My throat felt tight, a knot forming in my chest. I wanted to retort, to tell them my life was more than they could ever imagine, that my quiet existence held more meaning than their superficial successes, but the words wouldn't come. My tongue felt thick, useless. "Oh, and remember Mark Jensen," Chloe suddenly piped up, her eyes glinting with malicious glee. "Elara had such a crush on him. Wrote him a whole sonnet, I heard. He probably still thinks it's a joke. What was it? 'Your eyes like pools of midnight deep'?" She recited the line in a mocking, sing-song voice, clearly enjoying my visible discomfort. That was a memory I'd buried so deep I hadn't thought about it in years. The pure, unadulterated humiliation of that moment, when Mark had publicly laughed at my earnest, teenage confession, flooded back. My cheeks burned. "Still single, then?" Bethany pressed, her voice dripping with false concern. "No handsome prince swept you off your feet from behind the reference desk? Or are you still waiting for that mythical adventure to walk through the library doors?" She took a sip of her champagne, her eyes never leaving mine, daring me to challenge her. Her perfect hair, her expensive dress, her air of effortless superiority, it all screamed of the life she wanted everyone to believe she had, a life I supposedly lacked. I swallowed hard, my jaw clenching. Every fiber of my being screamed to run, to disappear, to simply cease to exist in that moment. My vision blurred slightly, and I felt the unwelcome sting of tears pricking at the corners of my eyes. No, I couldn't cry. Not here, not in front of them. It would be the ultimate surrender, the final victory they craved. I focused on a point just beyond Bethany's shoulder, trying to project an indifference I didn't feel. My silence, however, only seemed to fuel their fire. "See?" Chloe said, turning slightly to their other friends, who were now openly watching, some with thinly veiled amusement. "She's still the same. Can't even string two words together when she's cornered. Some people just never grow up, do they? They just get stuck." The implication hung heavy in the air. I was stagnant, pathetic, and irrelevant. The whispers around us intensified, a low hum of judgment that pressed in from all sides. I could feel the weight of their collective gaze, the silent agreement that Bethany and Chloe were right. I was a failure. My chest tightened, making it hard to breathe. The air felt thin, suffocating. I felt the first hot tear escape, tracing a path down my cheek. I quickly swiped at it, but it was too late. My composure was cracking. Bethany's lips curved into a triumphant smile, a cruel, knowing smirk that said, "I knew I could break you." "Honestly, Elara," Bethany continued, leaning in conspiratorially, her voice dropping to a theatrical whisper, though still loud enough for others to hear. "It's just sad. 10 years and you're still the small-town librarian, still alone, still dreaming of things that will never happen. You really are a lost cause, aren't you?" The words hit me like a physical blow. Lost cause. The phrase echoed in my mind, confirming every insecurity I'd ever harbored. My shoulders slumped, and I felt the fight drain out of me. I couldn't stand here anymore. I couldn't take another word. My head bowed, my gaze fixed on the polished floor, the tears now flowing freely, silently, betraying my attempt at stoicism. I just wanted to disappear, to vanish into the crowded room. And then the impossible happened. A strange, sudden hush fell over the room. It wasn't a gradual fade, but an abrupt, almost reverent silence that descended like a blanket, muffling the music, the chatter, the clinking of glasses. My ears strained, trying to understand the sudden absence of noise. The air around me, moments ago thick with their venom, now felt charged with something else entirely. A collective awe, a ripple of disbelief that started at the entrance and spread rapidly through the crowd. I heard a few gasps, then murmurs, growing louder, but still hushed, filled with a strange, almost worshipful tone. Bethany and Chloe, who had been gloating over my defeat, suddenly stopped talking. I could feel their attention, like everyone else's, snap away from me. My head still down, I felt the shift in energy, the sudden, overwhelming focus of every single person in the room on something or someone else. The silence was so profound, it felt like the entire universe had paused. My heart pounded, not from humiliation anymore, but from sheer, bewildered curiosity. What could possibly command such universal attention? Slowly, hesitantly, I lifted my head, my tear-filled eyes scanning the room. Every single face was turned towards the main entrance, their expressions a mixture of shock, wonder, and utter disbelief. The collective gasp from the room was my first clue. My head, bowed in self-preservation, slowly lifted. Every single face, from the indifferent to the mildly curious, was now fixed on the entrance. The air, thick with the scent of stale punch and my own burgeoning humiliation, shifted, crackling with an entirely different energy. A hush fell, a reverent silence that felt utterly out of place in a raucous high school reunion. It was the kind of quiet that meant something truly significant had just occurred. My eyes followed the collective gaze, tracing a path past the glittering chandeliers and the draped banners. And then I saw him, Julian Vance. He stood framed in the doorway, a figure so unexpected, so entirely out of place, that for a moment my mind refused to process it. He was a myth in our small town, a reclusive author whose words filled the shelves of my library, but whose presence in public was rarer than a lunar eclipse. He was taller than I remembered, his silver hair a distinguished contrast to his dark, tailored suit. His eyes, usually hidden behind the pages of a book or the quiet solitude of his lakeside estate, scanned the room with an almost surgical precision, cutting through the stunned faces. He wasn't looking for anyone specific, it seemed, until his gaze landed on me, directly on me. A tremor went through me, but it wasn't fear. It was recognition, a strange, inexplicable sense of inevitability. Beside me, Bethany and Chloe, who moments before had been basking in their cruel victory, froze. The smirks melted from their faces, replaced by expressions of utter bewilderment, then dawning realization. I saw Bethany's jaw clench, her eyes widening almost imperceptibly as Julian began to move. He didn't acknowledge anyone. He didn't offer a polite nod or a strained smile. His path was straight, unswerving, cutting a precise line directly towards our small, suffocating circle. The crowd parted around him, a silent, awestruck sea. Whispers, initially hesitant, began to ripple through the room like a sudden gust of wind. "Is that... no way... Julian Vance?" The murmurs grew, but Julian paid them no mind. His focus remained laser-sharp, fixed on me, and then on the two women who had just been tearing me apart. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drum. I wanted to run, to hide, to disappear, but my feet were rooted to the spot. I watched him approach, a silent, imposing force. The light from the ceiling caught the silver in his hair, making him seem almost ethereal, a figure from one of his own complex narratives. He stopped directly in front of us, his presence instantly eclipsing Bethany and Chloe. The air around us seemed to thicken, charged with an unspoken tension. He didn't speak immediately. He simply stood there, his gaze moving from me to Bethany, then to Chloe, a quiet assessment in his eyes that made them visibly shrink. Their carefully constructed facades of sophistication crumbled under his unwavering attention. Their shoulders slumped. Their hands, which had been gesturing so animatedly moments before, now hung uselessly at their sides. Then, slowly, deliberately, he extended his hand, not to shake theirs, not to offer a greeting. His long, elegant fingers reached for mine. He took my hand, his touch warm and firm, a silent anchor in the swirling chaos of my emotions. It was a gesture of profound intimacy, a public claim. The simple act sent a jolt through me, a shockwave that seemed to reverberate through every person in the room. I felt the heat rise in my cheeks, not from shame now, but from a dizzying mix of surprise and something akin to a burgeoning defiance. His gaze returned to Bethany and Chloe. His voice, when he finally spoke, was calm, measured, yet it cut through the murmurs in the room like a finely honed blade. "Excuse me, ladies," he said, his tone utterly devoid of malice, yet undeniably authoritative. "I believe you're speaking to my partner." His words hung in the air, a stunning declaration. Bethany's mouth opened slightly, then closed without a sound. Chloe's eyes darted between Julian and me, a flicker of raw panic in their depths. Julian's grip on my hand tightened imperceptibly. He paused, letting his words sink in, letting the full weight of the revelation settle over the stunned assembly. Then, he delivered the final, crushing blow. "Elara Vance," he added, his voice a quiet pronouncement. He didn't need to elaborate. The surname, his surname, hung in the air like an invisible crown. "And, I might add," he continued, a subtle, almost imperceptible shift in his gaze towards me, a warmth that was meant only for my eyes, my creative muse. The collective gasp that followed was louder this time, a wave of disbelief and awe washing over the entire room. Whispers erupted, a torrent of shocked murmurs and exclamations. Elara Vance, his muse? No way. Bethany and Chloe's faces were a study in utter devastation. The color drained from their cheeks, their eyes wide with a mixture of disbelief humiliation, and a dawning, bitter understanding. Their careful, cruel game had just been spectacularly overturned, their carefully cultivated image of superiority shattered into a million pieces. I, too, was stunned. My mind reeled, trying to process the enormity of what he had just said, what he had just done. My partner, Julian Vance, my creative muse. The words echoed in my ears, not as a lie, but as a truth I had never dared to articulate. A secret world suddenly thrown open for all to see. A wave of profound relief washed over me, so potent it almost buckled my knees. It mingled with a surge of unexpected empowerment, a feeling I hadn't known in years. My past tormentors, frozen in their humiliation, were now utterly powerless. Julian's fingers traced a gentle circle on the back of my hand, a silent reassurance. He turned his full attention back to Bethany and Chloe, his posture unwavering, his gaze steady and unwavering. There was no aggression in his stance, no overt threat, yet his presence was a clear, undeniable challenge. "Now," he said, his voice dropping slightly, a subtle, dangerous edge entering his tone, an unspoken warning that resonated through the sudden, fragile quiet. "Is there a problem?" Bethany and Chloe's meticulously constructed facades shattered, their smugness dissolving into an ugly mix of disbelief and sputtering rage. Bethany's mouth opened and closed, no sound emerging. Chloe, usually quick with a cutting remark, clutched her cocktail glass so tightly I thought it might shatter. Their eyes, wide with shock, darted between Julian's calm, authoritative presence and my stunned face. No problem at all, Julian," Bethany finally managed, her voice thin and reedy, a stark contrast to her earlier booming confidence. She even used his first name, a desperate attempt at familiarity. "We were just catching up with Elara. So lovely to see her." Julian's gaze remained steady, unwavering. He didn't press, didn't gloat. He simply nodded, a slow, deliberate movement that spoke volumes. The popular girls, sensing the definitive end of their performance, mumbled hurried goodbyes to nearby acquaintances, their retreat a clumsy, undignified scramble through the suddenly hushed crowd. Their clique, once a formidable wall of support, melted away behind them. The air, thick with their venom moments before, now felt strangely light, almost celebratory. Then the murmurs began to swell, not whispers of judgment, but of awe and curiosity. Faces I barely recognized. People who had ignored me all night now approached, their expressions a mix of surprise and genuine admiration. "Elara, I had no idea. Congratulations," someone gushed, a woman from my history class. "Julian Vance, here, and with you?" A man from the football team stammered, his eyes wide. Julian remained a silent anchor beside me, his hand still gently holding mine. He offered brief, polite acknowledgments to people, a quiet smile, but he let me navigate the sudden surge of attention. He didn't hog the spotlight, but rather steered it towards me. He answered vague questions about his latest work with a charming, almost mischievous evasiveness, always turning the conversation back to my involvement, my insights. "Elara often points me to the most obscure and fascinating sources," he'd say, or, "Her quiet observations are truly invaluable." I felt a dizzying shift. The girl who had been invisible, then humiliated, was now the center of a different kind of attention. It was overwhelming, surreal, yet incredibly validating. I watched as people who had once dismissed me now looked at me with a newfound respect, a flicker of envy. It wasn't just Julian's fame, it was the implicit validation of his choice, of me. Our relationship wasn't a whirlwind romance born of grand gestures. It started subtly, like the quiet turning of pages in a beloved book. I met Julian almost 2 years ago, not in a bustling cafe or a glamorous event, but in the hushed aisles of the town library. He'd initially sought rare texts for his research, his reclusive nature making him prefer the quiet dignity of dusty archives to the glare of public appearances. I, the new librarian, was assigned to assist him. Our first conversations were purely academic, focused on obscure historical figures or forgotten literary movements. He was precise, deeply intellectual, with eyes that seemed to absorb every detail. I was simply doing my job, diligently locating texts, offering cross-references. But slowly, the conversations shifted. He started asking my opinion on the books, not just their factual content, but their emotional resonance, their underlying themes. He'd observe my reactions to a passage, my quiet insights into a character's motivations. "You see things, Elara," he'd said one evening, months into our working relationship, as the library lights dimmed and the last patrons left. Things others miss, the subtext, the unspoken. He'd started lingering after the library closed, our discussions extending late into the night. We talked about art, philosophy, the human condition, my quiet observations about life in our small town, the nuanced interactions I witnessed daily, the hidden dramas within ordinary lives. These became grist for his creative mill. He'd listen intently, sometimes taking notes, his gaze unblinking. I shared my love for forgotten poets, my theories on character development, my quiet dreams. He didn't just listen. He absorbed. He reflected. He challenged. "That's it," he'd exclaimed one night, slamming a gentle fist on the table, a sudden spark in his usually contemplative eyes. "That's the core of my next protagonist. Your quiet resilience, Elara. Your ability to find depth in the mundane." It wasn't a proposal, not then, but it was a recognition, a profound intellectual connection that deepened into something more. He'd started bringing me coffee, then meals. He'd read me passages from his drafts, seeking my immediate, unfiltered reaction. He saw my quietness not as a flaw, but as a strength, a wellspring of deep understanding. Our dates weren't public dinners. They were long walks through the woods or silent evenings in his study, surrounded by books, the only sound the scratching of his pen or the rustle of pages. He didn't need me to be flashy or outgoing. He needed me to be me. I realized I wasn't just his partner in life. I was his creative collaborator, his quiet confidant, the steady presence that grounded his soaring imagination. I was his muse, not in a romanticized, ethereal sense, but in a profound, tangible way that fueled his work. Our relationship was unconventional, built on shared intellect, mutual respect, and a deep, abiding understanding that transcended societal expectations. We didn't need public displays. Our connection was our own. But now, our carefully protected world had been thrown open. The news of Julian Vance's unprecedented appearance at a high school reunion and his public declaration of a long-term partner and creative muse who just happened to be the local librarian would spread like wildfire. I could already feel the shift in the room. The initial shock was giving way to curiosity, and in some corners, a subtle skepticism. Was it real? Was Julian just rescuing a damsel in distress? Was this a genuine connection or a convenient display? As the reunion began to wind down, the crowd thinning, Julian gently took my hand. His serious gaze met mine, acknowledging the unspoken. "This changes things, doesn't it?" he murmured, his voice low, not a question, but a profound statement about the irreversible shift in our carefully constructed lives. The drive home from the reunion felt different, the night air no longer heavy with dread, but charged with an almost electric hum. Julian drove, his hand resting on my knee, a silent anchor in the whirlwind. The whispers, the stunned faces, the way Bethany and Chloe's carefully constructed facades had crumbled. It all replayed in my mind. I was no longer an invisible girl. I was Elara Vance, and the world now knew it. "Are you all right?" Julian's voice cut through my thoughts, soft but direct. He pulled into the driveway of my small cottage, the porch light illuminating the familiar path. I don't know," I admitted, the adrenaline starting to wane, leaving me feeling strangely lightheaded. It was a lot. He turned off the engine, the sudden silence amplifying the moment. "I imagined so. I apologize for the public nature of it. It was impulsive, perhaps, but I couldn't stand by and watch them diminish you." He looked at me, his eyes earnest. "You are not small, Elara. You are vast, and you are mine." My breath hitched. His words weren't just a rescue. They were a declaration, a reaffirmation of a bond we had built in quiet moments, away from prying eyes. "You called me your partner," I whispered, almost testing the word, "and your muse." He smiled, a rare, genuine curve of his lips. "You are both and more." It was time the world knew. He reached for my hand, his fingers tracing the lines of my palm. Our life together has been intensely private, but it is no less real, no less profound. I wanted them to see that. His directness, his unwavering confidence in us settled a tremor deep inside me. He wasn't just protecting me, he was claiming me, proudly, for the world to witness. We walked into the cottage, the familiar scent of old books, and brewing tea a comforting embrace. The silence between us now was not awkward, but full, pregnant with understanding. The next morning, the small town was abuzz. My phone, usually quiet, vibrated with messages and calls from people I hadn't heard from in years. The librarian who lived alone, surrounded by stories, was suddenly the subject of one. I walked into the library, usually my sanctuary, feeling a new kind of gaze. Not pity, not dismissal, but curiosity, and a strange, newfound respect. I was shelving a stack of new releases when the bell above the door chimed. My stomach clenched. Bethany stood there, alone, her usual entourage missing. She wore a tailored pantsuit, her expression a mix of forced pleasantness and barely concealed resentment. "Elara," she said, her voice strained. I was surprised to see Julian Vance at the reunion, and even more surprised by his announcement. I met her gaze, no longer shrinking from it. He's always been full of surprises. My voice was steady, calm. I didn't flinch, didn't look away. The old fear, the old shame, was gone, replaced by a quiet, unshakable certainty. She shifted, uncomfortable under my direct gaze. "Well, it's quite a story for a small-town librarian." The subtle jab was still there, a reflex. I simply smiled, a genuine, unforced smile that reached my eyes. "It is," I agreed. "And it's my story." I turned back to the shelves, calmly placing a book in its designated spot. I wasn't dismissive. I wasn't triumphant. I was just busy, living my life. Bethany stood there for a moment longer, her face a canvas of conflicting emotions, disbelief, anger, a flicker of something that looked like defeat. She realized there was no reaction to provoke, no wound to pick. She exhaled slowly, a sound of grudging surrender. And then, without another word, she turned and walked out, the bell chiming her departure. The relief wasn't a sudden explosion, but a quiet, profound settling. I had faced her, not with anger or retaliation, but with indifference. Her power over me had evaporated. Julian and I continued our life, now with an unspoken understanding that our privacy, while cherished, no longer needed to be a secret. He still worked in his secluded study, still sought my input on his characters, still found inspiration in the quiet observations I shared. Our evenings were still filled with books, debates, and the comfortable silence of two minds deeply attuned. But sometimes we would take a walk through town, his hand in mine, and I would feel the eyes on us, not with judgment, but with a quiet wonder. My work at the library felt richer, too. I wasn't just organizing books, I was connecting people to stories, to knowledge, to worlds beyond their own. I was still Elara, the small-town librarian, but now I knew that my world, though quiet, was expansive, filled with depth and purpose. Looking back, that reunion, that public humiliation, it had been a crucible. It stripped away the last vestiges of who I thought I had to be for others. And in that raw, vulnerable moment, Julian had stepped in, not to make me someone else, but to affirm who I already was and who we were together. He didn't just save me from a moment of shame. He freed me to fully embrace my own unique story. I often think of the quote Julian had once read to me from one of his favorite poets. "The soul is not where it lives, but where it loves." My soul, I realized, truly lived here, in this quiet town, in these books, in this profound and unconventional love. And that, I knew, was a story more compelling than any they could ever imagine.